All right, good afternoon, clearly. As you saw, the Secretary General this morning spoke at the informal session of the General Assembly, and this session is still going on. I think member states are making some statements and asking some questions. The Secretary General will be answering if he's not already doing so. In his remarks, he sounded the alarm that we face a world of trouble. He said that the ills such as armed conflict and climate change are generating anxiety and polarizing societies. The Secretary General said that it is not difficult to understand why many people are losing faith in political establishments as well as the United Nations. But he pointed out to the successes of 2018 in places such as Yemen, Liberia, Cambodia, as well as the progress on climate change made in Katowice to show that when we work together, we do get things done. The Secretary General acknowledged that many people see the UN as ineffective, cumbersome, and bureaucratic, stressing that the organization is reforming itself to be more nimble, effective, flexible, and efficient. He noted that there is a new UN development system in place to better support the efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and the UN is cutting red tape and implementing new management practices to bolster transparency and accountability. His remarks are available and have been made available to you. And as a reminder, the Secretary General will have a press conference in this very room on Friday. We hope to see you there, and he is expected to have a town hall meeting with staff tomorrow morning. That'll be with the staff all over the world to talk about the upcoming year and answer questions they may have. Turning over to the situation in Yemen this morning, the Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, thanked the government of Jordan over Twitter for its approval to host a meeting of the follow-up committee on implementing the prisoner exchange agreement, as well as its continued support for efforts to bring peace to Yemen. The Special Envoy and the International Committee for the Red Cross will take part in the meeting, which is already underway in Jordan. The Special Envoy hopes the release of prisoners will happen soon, and he believes this is a very important humanitarian step affecting the lives of thousands of Yemeni families. Here in New York, we'll have seen that the Security Council adopted unanimously a resolution setting up a special political mission to be known as the UN mission to support the Hodeidah Agreement for an initial period of 6 months. Also in the Council, the Assistant Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operation Bintou Keita briefed the Council on Mali. Having visited the country a month ago, she said that she was encouraged by progress to implement the 2015 peace agreement and the constructive nature of the relations between the parties. She, however, added that the security situation remains of grave concern, with attacks that continue to target peacekeepers, national and international forces, and increasingly civilians. She particularly noted the further deterioration of the security situation in the center of the country, where intercommunal violence and instrumentalized by extremist armed groups has intensified over the past months. She stressed that the G5 Sahel Joint Force remains an instrumental part of the response needed to address the threat of violence extremism in the region, and called upon the G5 Sahel members to take all steps necessary to resume operations of the joint forces as soon as possible, and on international partners to provide it with the support that it deserves. And on Nigeria, our humanitarian colleagues there report that on January 14th, non-state armed groups attacked a military position in civilian locations, including a humanitarian hub managed by the International Organization for Migration in Ran in northeastern Nigeria's Borno state. The attack resulted in the killing of several internally displaced people, where some 3,000 Nigerians have crossed the border into Cameroon, and thousands have fled to different locations. The UN in Nigeria calls on all parties to the conflict to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law and to take all measures to protect civilians, civilian infrastructures, and humanitarian operations. And on the Democratic Republic of the Congo, our UN human rights colleagues there say that according to allegations from credible sources, at least 890 people were killed between the 16th and 18th of December in 4 villages in Yumbi territory, Maidumbe province in the west of the country. This appears to be clashes between Banunu and Batende communities. Our human rights colleagues said that the report suggests that at least 82 people were also injured in the attack, but the actual number of those injured is expected to be higher. And the the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said the violence must be promptly and thoroughly investigated and the perpetrators brought to justice. She offered the advice and support of her office in the conduct of investigations, as well as in efforts to prevent the recurrence of such violence and to work towards justice and reconciliation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, Jean-Pierre Lacroix, is in Haiti today to lead a strategic assessment mission on the different options available to the UN's continued presence in Haiti. He is accompanied by Assistant Secretary General for Europe and Central Asia and the Americas from the Department of Political Affairs, Miroslav Yencha, alongside UNDP, UN women officials, and other representatives from across the system. As part of his two-day visit, Mr. Lacroix will meet with Haitian officials and the UN family in the country, as well as personnel from the peacekeeping mission, the UN Mission for Justice and Support in Haiti. This strategic assessment mission will provide the Secretary General with an evaluation of the situation on the ground and recommendation on the way forward, based on which the Security Council will determine by April 15th both the exact timing and the end of peacekeeping mission's mandate and the configuration of the UN mission to follow. And you saw this morning, yesterday afternoon, we issued a statement from the Secretary General condemning the terrorist attack in Nairobi, and he also addressed it in his opening remarks this morning. And just to flag that our colleagues at the UNAIDS and the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization are urging countries in Western and Central Africa to do more to stop new HIV infections among children and adolescents and to boost HIV testing and treatment coverage. At a high-level meeting bringing together governments, health experts, UN agencies, civil society, and other partners in Senegal today, UNAIDS reported that while progress has been seen in curbing new HIV infections among children in 11 countries in the region, others, including Nigeria, which was the largest epidemic in the region, experienced no decline at all. And although there have been advances in antiretroviral therapy coverage for children in Western and Central Africa, the region still has the lowest coverage in the world. And in a statement, UNAIDS Executive Director Michel Sidibé said that in order to remove barriers and save lives, these countries will need to address underlying issues, including the lack of investment, fragile health system, user fees, inequality, and widespread stigma and discrimination. And today we thank Bhutan and Finland to the honor roll. The two countries have paid their regular budget dues in full for 2019, which leaves, that's not the question. The question, how many countries still have to pay? 182. God, this is why we're in this business and not trying to solve big scientific problems. And at 3 p.m. today, there'll be a press conference here by Jorge Arrezea, the Minister for the People's Power for Foreign Affairs of Venezuela. And between now and then, I'm happy to take, or at least I will take your questions. Yes.
Thank you, Steph. A question on Syria. I was wondering if the SG has any comment on Turkey's plan to form a 20-mile safe zone in Syria. And a second question, if the SG will be attending the World Economic Forum in Davos.
I think we can expect an announcement on Davos on Friday when he gives his press conference. We have not been directly and fully briefed on the Turkish plans. Obviously, we'll see what happens. As a matter of principle, the United Nations has always stood for the territorial integrity of Syria. Yep.
Stephane, on one of the proposals that reportedly been discussed about safe zone in Syria is a UN deployment to prevent clashes between Turks and Kurds in that part of Syria. And I know you don't talk hypothetical, so I want to ask you, is it possible on a technical and legal side for UN to have a role, that kind of role, without a Security Council authorization or a resolution? And is Secretary General theoretically willing to let the UN play that role?
Okay. As you took the words out of my mouth, that I will not answer hypotheticals. So on the second one, I'm not going to even speculate. As a very general and broad statement, it would be very doubtful that any, let me refer you, instead of going hypothetical, I think you would only have to look to the past to see where safe zones in the past have been created, and they've all, to my knowledge, have involved the Security Council.
And about Syria, another question. Today's Secretary General's statement mentioned Syria, and he warned about the potential humanitarian catastrophe in northeast and northwest Syria. Is this because of the reportedly potential military operation by Turkey against the Kurds? Was he referring to that?
I think Secretary General watches the news like all of us. So I think we are seeing the current instability in that part of Syria, which is leading our humanitarian colleagues to have great concerns. On top of that, I think we're seeing in parts of the region, which has hit notably Syria and Lebanon, a very nasty weather system, which has had a horrific impact on refugees in Lebanon, on internally displaced people in Syria. The winter, as we have reminded people, for every winter during this conflict, brings an increased hardship and suffering to people who are already in dire situation. Linda, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Steph. Following up on Syria, I was wondering, in his remarks, I believe you said that the SG viewed Yemen as becoming successful or successful in terms of the international community dealing with it. I was wondering how he would characterize, for example, the political process, the efforts towards reaching a political decision regarding Syria.
Look, we've just appointed a new envoy, Mr. Peterson, who is there. I think there still remains a big gulf in terms of the political lack of progress in terms of the political talks in Syria. We hope that Mr. Peterson, especially with his trip to the region, he was in Syria, will help re-energize the parties to coalesce around the UN's efforts. James, we'll go down the line.
Yes, further question on Yemen and the Jordan talks. Could you give us a little bit more detail? My understanding is this is a joint UN-ICRC talks procedure. I also hear reports it goes on for 3 days. And who are parties to these talks? Because the Houthis are, my understanding, have problems with the fact that some of the prisoners they want exchanged are not held by the government of Yemen. They've been transferred to Saudi Arabia or to the United Arab Emirates. Are those two countries also party to these talks?
Let me give you a bit more. The meeting it's really a technical meeting. It's a follow-up to the implementation of the prisoner exchange agreement, which was signed shortly before the talks in Sweden. The agreement signed between the two parties since the beginning of the conflict. The two parties exchanged the list of prisoners in Sweden, and they're now discussing steps to implement it. So it is between the two parties being the government of Yemen and the Houthis. As far as the length of the meeting, I think we have enough experience to be able to announce the start of a meeting without speculating about the end of a meeting. Edie and then Evelyn, then we'll move south.
2 questions. First, on Yemen, can you tell us, are there still about 20 monitors deployed in the Hodeidah area, and any indication of how long it's going to take to get the 75 monitors authorized by the Security Council into the region? And secondly, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said yesterday that the Palestinians are going to reactivate their application for full UN membership. Was this discussed? Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Was this discussed with the Secretary General in their meeting?
Okay, you sneeze, I'll answer. Go ahead. All right. Taking your questions backwards, we have not received any official. Secretariat has not received any official request from Palestine on the issue. Your first question, yes, I think the numbers are about the same. From our end, we will mobilize as quickly as possible. But of course, these monitors, the people that are coming in, whether they're monitors, whether humanitarian workers, need visas, and it is important that that the parties make sure that all the administrative clearances are given as quickly as possible. Stefano.
Yes, about.
Sorry, no, I promised Evelyn. Sorry, go ahead.
Again, on President Abbas. The Palestinians have also spoken of the need for a protective force. Was this at all raised with the Secretary General?
On which I'm not aware of anything beyond what we said in the readout. I was just given some extra details, in fact, on the situation in Hodeida, that the chair of the RCC, General Kammert, has continued to shuttle between the RCC representatives of the government of Yemen and the Houthis this week. The aim is to strengthen the ceasefire and to find common ground on a plan for the redeployment forces in the 3 ports and the city of Hodeida. Independent of the redeployment plan, the parties have now confirmed in writing to the chair their commitments to facilitate the access of UN humanitarian agencies to the Red Sea mills. As you may know, the Red Sea mills currently hold about 51,000 metric tons of food commodities, and that's enough to feed more than 3.5 million people for a month. And in the coming days, the chair and his team will propose a plan for the parties and the humanitarian partners on how to access the area and retrieve the commodities before they outlive their shelf lives and become unfit for human consumption. Stefano.
Yes, the United States is on the verge of recognizing a new president of Venezuela. I mean, it's instead than Nicolas Maduro, the president of the National Assembly. This should happen, at least press saying that it's happening any moment. What would be the reaction of the Secretary General in a situation like this, where who is the president for Secretary General? Who is going to be tomorrow the president of Venezuela?
Well, Stefano, you know us well enough that we're not going to get into answering what may or may not happen. It's not up for the Secretary General to recognize, to give recognition or blessing to a head of state or another. The issues of credentials and who is recognized at the UN is an issue for member states. The UN team on the ground continues to work with the government of Venezuela as they have done.
Just a brief follow-up, but because the contention here is about the election, means many not only United States but other countries have been saying that there was a fraud on the elections, so they don't recognize Maduro as a legitimate president.
As I said, it's not.
What the Secretary General thinks about the election that were held in Venezuela.
I think we made comments at the time, and I have nothing else to add. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question on the migrant caravan. It's been reported that a second group of people took off from El Salvador in the last couple of hours. So I wonder if there is any update on any efforts by the UN to assist or help this group of people as they make their way up, and whether or not you have received any kind of request, maybe by other governments.
No, we as far as I know, we, in terms of the Secretariat and Secretary General's office, has not received anything. I would encourage you to check with IOM, UNHCR, and UNICEF. Sherwin, you looked impatient.
Not at all, not at all. I wanted to ask about the sexual harassment survey. I thought you might have said something about that already, but clearly at the bottom of your pile. Could you just talk about what it says, what the findings of the survey says about the UN system at large?
Sure. This was a survey of the whole UN system, as asked for by the Secretary General. This is part of his overall efforts on combating sexual harassment, which is something he's really been doing since day one. It found that the UN was basically in line with a lot of other institutions. The response rate was, I think, about 17%, which is on the low end. But according to the contractor who conducted the survey, is also within the margins. It's also important to say that it's the first such survey, which gives the UN system a kind of benchmark on which to monitor progress. It showed that quite a large number of recipients were aware of the zero tolerance rules, also seemed to think that things had gotten better. About a third of the respondents had reported some experience of sexual harassment in the last 2 years, mainly in terms of not physical attacks, but improper jokes, office atmosphere, and so forth. And it showed what I think what we all already know, that the most vulnerable groups are mostly young women, members of the LGBT communities, and I think it's for the Secretary General, it's a very I think it's a sobering look at where we are, and it shows, I think also it should be seen as part of his overall commitment to combat sexual harassment, which means, creating new posts in internal investigations. I think 6 new investigators were hired, all women, to ensure that all complaints of sexual harassment were upgraded to what we call Category 1, opening up of helplines, creating a system-wide kind of employment check to make sure that people who have been found to have committed harassment in one part of the system, they're not rehired in the system. And I think most of all in addressing the power imbalance. And that's where his push on gender parity comes in. As you know, we now have gender parity plus in terms of his senior management group, in terms of resident coordinators, and so this is a push that he is continuing to make.
Just one follow-up, if I may. 17% participation. Does that number bother the Secretary General? Why was it so low?
Listen, of course, it would have been great to have a higher response rate. According to the contractors, the response rate for organizations between 5% and 60% in general. It's the first survey of its kind. It's also difficult sometimes to get people involved. We hope that people understand this is the first one. There will be more participation. And what I think is interesting, this survey was open not only to staff, but to people who have temporary contracts, contractors, from drivers to cleaning personnel, those people often also most at risk. Yeah. And then Iftikhar, sorry.
On the same subject, Stephane, you outlined there some additional comments which were not particularly in regard to how you say the report said that some things had improved in handling of sexual harassment. However, that wasn't in the main story done by Reuters last night that outlined this study. Where is the report so that we can look at it? Because I don't.
Sure, I think copies of the report were shared. We'll have for those of you interested, there is a briefing at 3 p.m. This afternoon. So just come by my office.
Okay, because I didn't see it on any of the released documents. That's why I asked.
Okay. Iftikhar has been very patient.
Thank you, Stephane. On this new tensions between China and United States over the reported Taiwan's intention to declare independence. Do you have any comments?
No specific comment, except we always encourage the parties to work for the lowering of tensions. Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stephane. I understand from what you said, the Secretary General this morning at the General Assembly address described well the turmoil in the world, including conflicts raging all over the world. And he spoke about his reforms, if I understood correctly. Did he offer any concrete solutions?
Well, I think I would encourage you to read the 10-page long speech which I think does offer a number of ways forward. And part of it is, of course, making the United Nations more fit for purpose, more nimble, and closer to the field, which is what the general intent of the reforms has been. James, and then we'll go to Monica.
I have a question on Zimbabwe and also a couple of points of clarification now you've read another Hodeidah statement, if that's possible. First, Zimbabwe, there's been a somewhat brutal crackdown in Zimbabwe on protesters, and the internet and social media have been cut. Has the Secretary-General got any response to that?
We are following that situation closely. We hope that people are able to demonstrate peacefully and freely. And as a matter of principle, we've always called for the fact that people should have free access to information that includes what's on the internet.
And some very detailed, minor, but just want clarification on Hodeidah. One, you said that General Kammert had been shuttling between the parties. That, I assume, means the RCC has not met with all of the parties together at one time, either face-to-face.
No, it has.
Recently. I mean, he hasn't been able to get them back together.
I think he met with them twice, but in the last few days, it's been shuttling. There's been no new face-to-face meeting.
But is there a refusal for them to meet either by video conference or whatever?
I think if he could get them to sit down together, he would have.
Okay, and a couple more clarifications, if you don't mind. This now has an acronym. Is the aim still to get a ceasefire beyond Hodeidah to other parts of Yemen? And if so, why have Hodeidah in the name of this mission? Why not make it the monitoring mission for Yemen?
This particular mission has been created in response to the Stockholm Agreement, which look at Hodeidah specifically. So this is really a mechanism that is for Hodeidah. Of course, the goal remains to bring peace throughout Yemen. But this particular mission right now is focused on Hodeidah and the other the two other cities and the other ports and the other city. But it's basically an implementation mechanism for Stockholm.
And the last question, which is one that I had problems while writing this story this morning, and I apologise to my colleagues if they know the answer. But in UN terms, is there a difference between monitors and observers, or for our copy, are those interchangeable?
The monitors will report back.
I know, but are the two phrases in UN terms, monitors and observers?
I don't even pretend to be...
You're calling them you're repeatedly calling them monitors.
Yeah.
Previously, we've had UN observers in various
places. They're called
Is there a difference between them?
We can not being a native. I understand. I don't mean to be a smart aleck. I'll try to get you an answer.
Okay, thanks.
Joe, and then Linda, and then please.
This is a very quick question. You mentioned that the Secretary General's press conference is on Friday. I didn't hear you indicate the time.
Noontime.
Noontime, okay.
For that day's performance, instead of the spokesman, you'll get his understudy. Yes, Linda, you had another question.
Yes, excuse me. Following up on Yemen, in terms of these monitors or observers, how much freedom of movement do they have at this point?
Well, that's we'll have to see once they're all there. The issue of there has been a challenge for General Kammert himself and others. For freedom of movement, and it is imperative that all the parties ensure the safety and the freedom of movement of the team. Monica, all yours.
Is noontime noon, or is it?
He's the Secretary General. It's not spokesman's noontime. Yeah.